This is Ambition Today. Today we are joined by Nir Eyal. He is the author of Hooked and his new book, Indestructible. This is Ambition Today.
These are the entrepreneurs, creators, investors, and builders who ambitiously change to the world. Explore the hardships and heroisms of everyday life while we reveal the key moments to leave behind a lasting legacy. This is Ambition Today with Kevin Siskar.
What's up, world? I am Kevin Siskar, and you are listening to Ambition Today. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast in your favorite podcast app. Apple, Spotify, Google, SoundCloud, Stitcher, really anywhere that you listen to podcasts. And now for as little as $3 a month, you can join the Ambition Today back channel. For every episode, we've been going longer with each guest and asking them one question: what is the single greatest piece of advice you've ever learned in your life, and tell us the story of how you learned it. This question has given some amazingly deep and powerful insights from the guests. You can now join at siskar.co/alist. And in case you missed it, last episode we talked to Byron Reese. He's the CEO of GigaOM and his new book, The Fourth Age. But today I'm very excited. We're joined by Nir Eyal. He is the author of Hooked, and later this year he's coming out with his new book, Indestructible. Nir, welcome to Ambition Today.
Thanks, Kevin. It's great to be here.
Very excited to have you here. You probably don't realize this, remember this because Twitter, but you actually helped me build my email list. I saw you a few years ago using a Zapier recipe where you auto-thanked new followers. I don't even know. I think I messaged you. You said, oh, it's Zapier or something. I figured out how to do it.
Nice.
I gained thousands of followers off of that.
Are you still using it?
Twitter shut it down.
Yeah,
the window opened and closed on that one.
Yeah, and Zapier is fantastic. I love that company, and I wish I would have invested, but now they've gotten so big since I started using that tool. That's a good reminder. When you see a tool that you're like, wow, this is awesome, see if you can get into that company early.
Yeah, that is actually one of my favorite companies. You could build things with that you just couldn't imagine, or would take years of developer time years ago. I also want to thank Taylor from FocusMate for connecting us and making this happen.
Another great product that time I saw and I started using. I liked it so much I did invest in the company.
How would you describe FocusMate for maybe people listening?
FocusMate is chat roulette without all the nasty bits, but for enterprise. So if you remember chat roulette, you're connected with some random person. A lot of very lascivious behavior was going on chat roulette, but this is similar in that you're connected with another person, but the idea here is to get stuff done. So I have this problem with distraction. It's actually the subject of my next book is all about how I conquered distraction. And one of the tools that I think helps me conquer distraction is a tool like FocusMate.com that I like so much. I just used it and found it to be such a great product that I invested in it. You're basically connected with another person at a set period of time that you plan in advance, and then you both get work done. And by having that other person working virtually next to you, it provides this accountability system to block out distraction and actually focus on what you want to work on.
Yeah, I love it. It's like having an accountability buddy,
right.
As Next Jump or Charlie Kim or one of our previous mentors would say. But so if you're in a remote employee or maybe you're in a co-working space, or it's definitely great to check out.
Right.
Awesome. But we are here today. We are in the heart of New York City, Midtown Manhattan.
Yes, as you can hear by the frequent sirens, we apologize for that.
Oh, please. We've had more New York City on this podcast than I would care to admit. I believe we had pipes maybe in our last episode.
Oh, is that right? Hopefully we won't have that this time. But I've been here for about 2 years now, and it's great to be here. It's an awesome town. I left in 2006 to go out to the Bay Area. And now I'm back. It's a wonderful place.
Nice. Well, New York is excited to have you here. But let's take it all the way back to the beginning. Tell us a bit about where and how you grew up, and maybe if there was any entrepreneurial influences from your childhood or anything there.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So let's see. So I'm originally from Israel. I was born in Israel, but I moved when I was 3 years old. So I consider myself very much an American today. Proud citizen. We were naturalized when I was 18 and grew up in Orlando, Florida. And I think part of what turned me into an entrepreneur was that, I think a lot of entrepreneurs have this story of feeling different from a very young age. And I think, with this weird name, Nir, and actually the name of my blog, Near and Far, came from, kids used to say near and far, near and far. So I kind of try to turn that into a positive now with my blog and have the last laugh there. So, so grew up in Orlando. I took a gap year. I did AmeriCorps for a year where I served in an underprivileged school in Atlanta. Went to Emory, then from there then I became a consultant at the Boston Consulting Group, did my time there, and then started a solar energy business. We had really great timing there. We basically did what you would think of a solar city doing today, but this was a long time ago. This was back in 2003, so well before Solar City, but we did a similar model. We sold that company a few years later, thankfully, and then I went to the Graduate School of Business at Stanford, started another company called AdNectar, which was in the gaming and advertising space. That company was acquired by a company that then became acquired by Yahoo. And when AdNectar was acquired, I had some time on my hands, and I had this hypothesis that the companies of the future would really rely upon habits, that I saw this shrinking interface of how we've gone from desktop to laptops to mobile devices to wearables, and now with the audio interface with audibles, you see that the interface has shrunk dramatically. So the amount of space,
can't even see it anymore.
Exactly. So the screens are disappearing. And what that means from a user engagement perspective is that you have to create a habit or your company might as well not exist. Not for every company, not every business needs to be habit forming, but we're finding more and more that, if you're not on the home screen of someone's phone, if you're not a memorized Alexa skill, if you're not something that is top of mind, you lose. I think, when I was learning product management, I was told this lie that the best product wins. And that is a lie. That's not true. It's not the best product that wins. It's the product that captures the monopoly of the mind, the first to mind solution that we turn to with little or no conscious thought. The ones that can create habits are the ones that win the market. And so I really wanted to understand what makes a habit forming product. And at the time, I didn't find any books or materials that really told me how to do it. And so I decided to write the book I was looking for. I started blogging about this topic. The blogging turned into a course that I taught at Stanford Graduate School of Business for many years, and then at the design school there. Then let's see. So I turned that course into the book Hooked. And then after that book was published, I started writing about kind of the other side of the problem. At the time when I got started in writing about product management and habit forming products, the big problem was, how do we get people to use our products, right?
Yeah.
And nobody was talking about overuse or addiction. People were like, desperate to get people to use their products. And by and large, that still is the problem that most companies have today. But then there was this other problem of some people overusing a product. And I kept getting asked questions about this. And so I decided to explore that question around, why do we get distracted? And so that led me to my next book, which will be out in September of 2019. And that brings me to the present day.
Nice. So you're actually the second person we've had on the podcast who played in the gamification space and is now, on the flip side, Gabe Zickerman we had on. And he created his new company, Onward, which was essentially a tech addiction software that would wean you off. Mm-hmm. So taking this back a little bit to the beginning here, was there anything from your childhood or Emory or something? Mm-hmm. Did you have an entrepreneurial grandparent or uncle, or were you kind of always figuring stuff out on your own?
Yeah, I mean, I was, I think if there was a seminal experience, it would be the fact that I was a very big kid. I was clinically obese at one point. Okay. And I remember my parents taking me.
You're in very good shape now.
Thank you. Well, if you write about habits, you kind of need to be you have to master your habits. And it came from a personal interest in this field, right? My friend Gretchen Rubin always says that research is me search. And so this is something that I wanted for myself. And it's a question that I've always struggled with of when I was a kid, I oftentimes felt like food controlled me, that I wasn't in control of food. And that's why I became obese. It wasn't just about the food. It was about what was going on inside me. And when I finally gained control over this, something that I felt like always controlled me, not only did I have a renewed sense of agency and control over the world in my life, but I also became fascinated by how did these commercial interests do that to me, right?
Yeah.
How did they design the television commercials and the products to entice me so much that I found it challenging sometimes to not eat this food. So that was a pretty important experience, I think, in my life, and I think everything I've done since has been tangentially or directly involved with how do products change human behavior.
Yeah, well, to your point, I mean, you mentioned your company AdNectar and your time in the advertising space. That, I come from an ad tech background at Collective here in New York, and being on the inside of an advertising company, I feel like changes your perspective of exactly what you just said. You stop wondering, oh, how did they do that? And you're like, oh, this is how they did that.
Yeah,
This is exactly how they did that.
But what's interesting is that, I found that most people in advertising didn't really know the deeper psychology. That, we think about advertising like in the age of Mad Men, bringing in all these psychologists and researchers. And by and large, when I got into the ad business, it might have changed today. I don't work with that many ad agencies today, but in circa 2007, 2008, I never met any psychologists on staff at ad agencies.
Yeah.
Where the psychologists were, where they were gainfully employed, was at the tech companies. Right. It was at Facebook. It was at Google. It was at these kind of companies that employed people with psychology backgrounds.
Did you watch the Joe Rogan Elon Musk interview?
No, the one where he smoked pot?
Yeah,
No, I didn't see that one.
But there's a point in there where Elon talks about how the entire world that, we've created over the 90-some billion people that have been alive since, the start of the Earth is essentially a projection of our mind and our amygdala onto the world we've created. And it's interesting to your point, like, people don't realize that these things they're doing are these, psychologically fulfilling things, but we're humans and we've made everything. So that's just kind of like what we've done.
Well, and it's not necessarily horrible. I mean, I think we talk about manipulation. It has a very sinister tone to it. But I would argue that manipulation is actually a neutral term, that there's two types of manipulation. There's persuasion and then there's coercion. And I would argue that from those two types of manipulation, that in fact, we want to be manipulated. We pay for the privilege. When you go to a movie theater, that's not real people up on that screen. That's just flickering light. Right? And you suspend disbelief. You allow yourself to be manipulated. And in fact, when you see Brad Pitt up there, saying his lines, he's not the character. He's playing a part that he's being paid to play. But you suspend disbelief. You want to believe that for those 2 hours that you're watching the film, he really is that person. When you watch a magic show, you want to be manipulated. That's why we go to movies and shows and basketball games and whatever. We want to feel something. So this isn't necessarily sinister, but I think there's a big difference between persuasion, which is helping people do something or feel something they want to do, versus coercion, which is getting people to do something they don't want to do, that they regret.
Right. So through your time with AdNectar, Sunshine, you were the founder of both those companies, two acquisitions. Congrats on that.
Thanks.
What advice would you have to other founders, maybe staking out after having done two?
Yes, I think the advice that there's lots of advice, but I think that...
We'll keep it to CEO advice, and then we'll move on to Hooked in a minute here.
Yeah, so I think, one of the things I wish somebody would have told me is to not do it for the money.
Okay.
That I think we get wound up around kind of the exit opportunity, or at least I have to admit I did, and I'm a little embarrassed by that, because frankly, if you are in the startup game to get rich, you're just bad at math because the odds are heavily against you. That is a bad reason to do a startup, to get rich. The right reason to do a startup is because you want to see the product or service come to fruition. That, I give this test in my book, Hooked, called the Manipulation Matrix. And it asks people to ask themselves two questions when it comes down to applying these psychological persuasion techniques that I teach about how to build for user engagement. I ask them to consider these two questions to make sure they're doing so ethically. And I'll get back to why this is important CEO advice in a second. But the two questions are, if you're going to apply these techniques, number one, do you believe that you are materially improving people's lives? So that's not for something that, you judge others or others judge you. Just looking in the mirror and asking yourself, hey, is the product I'm working on materially improving people's lives? But that's not good enough. The second question you have to ask yourself is, am I the user? And the reason I want people to answer in the affirmative to both of those questions, and that's the only way you pass this manipulation matrix test, is because if you answer the affirmative, I'm making you break the first rule of drug dealing. Do you know the first rule of drug dealing?
I do not, but I want to know the first rule.
The first rule of drug dealing is never get high on your own supply. And the reason I want people to break this rule of drug dealing and get high on their own supply is because if there are any deleterious effects to overusing their product, you're going to be the first person to know about it. So if and only if you believe your product is materially improving people's lives and you are the user, then you can, with good conscience, use these techniques. The ancillary benefit is that you are also partaking in very good business practices, that you increase your odds of success tremendously when you are the user. And a lot of people don't realize that, especially here in New York. I hear a lot of people who are building products in ad tech. Mm-hmm. And they say, oh, this is a product that I'm sure, Coca-Cola and Pfizer and all these big advertisers, Geico, they're going to love this product. Well, have you ever worked at an ad agency? Have you worked for a big brand? Do you know what kind of ads they buy and why they buy them? No. Well, because you're not the user. And so you have no clue what your user wants. So that is the ultimate hack that you can use to build a great product, is to build for yourself. Because the hardest part about building a great product is knowing what the user wants. So why wouldn't you hack that part of the process by making yourself the user? Make a product that you yourself want. Not only do you increase your odds of success, not only are you on the good side of the ethical equation here, but you can't fail. Because if you make a product that you yourself want, even if the business itself is a financial failure, which odds are it will be, at least you have the product. Yeah. At least you have a product that you yourself find very valuable. And if you look at the history of, who founded Google and Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and Slack, all of these people passed this test at the time. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't have, unintended consequences, right? As Paul Virillo said, if you invent the ship, you invent the shipwreck, right? So there's lots of bad things that technologies give us, right? Cars are amazing, planes are amazing, but there are car crashes and plane crashes, unfortunately. But it does help you as the founder increase your odds of success by passing that two-part test, by building something for yourself.
I love that. That's excellent advice, and I couldn't agree more. We're going to take a quick break. We're here with Nir Eyal talking about his new book, Indestructible, and his previous book, Hooked. We'll be right back with more.
This is Ambition Today.
Join the A-List back channel. Don't miss the single greatest piece of advice Nir has ever received. The price is super founder friendly, starting at only $3. Visit siscar.co/A-List to join the show's back channel today.
And it's a good one too.
Visit Ambition Today online at siscar.co and follow the show on social media at Ambition Today.
Welcome back. We are here with Nir Eyal. We're talking about his journey thus far through entrepreneurship, his book Hooked, and his new book Indestructible. Nir, let's jump over to Hooked. So you created the book based on this course. Why did you write a book, right? You could have just kept teaching the course. Talk to us a little bit about, that is, it's not starting a new company, but it's a pretty entrepreneurial step in and of itself. So talk to us about why you wrote the book and sort of what the effects were.
Yeah, so I wrote the book. Well, sorry, I started exploring this field because I couldn't find the book I was looking for. I had a hypothesis around how I wanted to spend my human capital, right? So investors, VCs will figure out how to allocate their financial capital. I want to figure out how to allocate my human capital. Unfortunately, as a founder, you can't diversify your human capital. You can't spread money around the way a VC does. So you have to pick really well because you can only ride one horse at a time until that horse is bought by somebody else or the horse dies. So I really wanted to make sure I decided well. And so I had this hypothesis that after I sold my last company, that whatever I was going to do next had to be habit forming. I kind of, I put a stake in the ground and said that this is the future, because as we mentioned before the break, it's all about the interface getting smaller and smaller, meaning habits become increasingly important. There's less room to externally trigger people. You have to be something that people use with little or no conscious thought, or you might as well not even exist. And so I was looking for, okay, well, how do I do that? How do I build habit forming products? And I couldn't find that book. So I decided to do a lot of research. I talked to the people who built some of these world changing companies like Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and Slack, and all of these companies to try and figure out what were the common elements. And I did a lot of research with academics to try and understand, what was the deeper psychology behind why we behave the way we do. Spent a lot of time in the Stanford library reading through a lot of academic journals. And with all that study and research, I came up with this 4-part model that I call the hooked model, which we see endemic to all sorts of habit-forming products, both online and offline. We find the same basic 4 steps in all these products. And so what I wanted to do was, the problem that we had at my last 2 companies, and I think is endemic to all startups, the biggest problem, the biggest unanswered question is always, what do we build next? I mean, that really is the CEO's job, is prioritizing where do we spend our resources? What do we build next? And this problem was something that I didn't find a great answer to. I mean, we bought into lean startup, hook, line, and sinker. I'm still an advocate of it. It's great. It's much better than the way we used to build software. But I think when you look at the lean startup methodology of build, measure, learn, it looks like each of those 3 parts are equally weighted. But if you've actually built product, that's not true.
Right.
That measuring and learning is easy, right? Once you set up the infrastructure, that's fun. Where the blood, sweat, and tears and money all go is the building part. So if you don't invest the most time into figuring out what the hell do we build, that is a make or break company decision. And the way we decide what to build is really screwed up at most companies. 9 times out of 10, it's, let's build what the hippo wants us to build. Do you know who the hippo is?
I do not.
The highest paid person's opinion.
Oh, okay.
Right, so that's the hippo. The highest paid person says, I want X.
I've seen people fall into that many a time.
And that works sometimes if the hippo happens to be particularly insightful or lucky. Sometimes at companies you build what the investors build, which is almost always the wrong thing, because typically investors are way too far removed from the end user. Sometimes it's, let's build what the loudest customer says we should build, but who says that the loudest customer is right? So instead of listening to the hippo or your investors or the loudest customer, we should build based on some kind of framework, some kind of psychology that tells us how do people behave in the real world. Because what they tell you they'll do is oftentimes very different from what they actually do. And that's where the hooked model is useful. You take out this framework and you answer these 5 fundamental questions, and you'll see where your product is deficient from an engagement and habit forming perspective.
And so you mentioned that there was 4 perspectives to the hooked model.
Parts, right.
4 parts. For those that maybe haven't read the book, would you mind just quickly walking through this?
Yeah, sure. So there's 4 parts, 5 questions. So the 4 parts of the hook model are the trigger, the action, the reward, and the investment. So the first question is about the internal trigger. What internal trigger, what customer itch is your product addressing on a psychological level? When I talk to companies about, why does the customer need your product, they get very technical, very functional. Yeah. But the fact is that all human behavior is driven by one thing. And that one thing is the need to modulate our mood. All behavior. It used to be we subscribed to this Freudian theory of the pleasure principle, that we're all seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. That's not exactly right. It's actually, neurologically speaking, all about pain avoidance. So you have to figure out what's the discomfort that is occurring frequently enough in your user's life to build a habit around. I'll give you some examples. If we're uncertain, we Google. If we're lonely, we Facebook. If we're bored, we check YouTube or Reddit or the news, right? So all products fundamentally have to, I don't care what your product is.
I'm tired, I drink coffee.
Exactly. If you're going to form a habit, you have to understand what is the user's itch that occurs with sufficient frequency. So that's the internal trigger. Next is the external trigger. External trigger is something in your environment that tells you what to do next. A ping, a ding, a ring, something that gives you a piece of information for what to do next. So that's the second question you have to answer. What's the external trigger that prompts your user to action? Next comes the action phase, which is defined as the simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward. It's a scroll on Pinterest. It's a search on Google. It's hitting the play button on YouTube. The simplest thing the user can do to get relief from that discomfort. Then comes the reward, and the reward tends to be a variable reward, meaning there's some kind of uncertainty, some kind of mystery that solves the user's problem, that scratches their itch, and yet leaves them wanting more. So if you think about the variable reward on Facebook is the scroll, right? What will you see next? What are the comments going to say? What video might you see? How many likes does something get? High degree of variability. There's a lot more complexity there. There's 3 types of variable rewards, which we can talk about more later. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, is the investment phase of the hook. And this is going to become increasingly important with the development of artificial intelligence. The investment phase is where the user puts something into the product to make the product better and better with use. The investment phase is really the most important part of the hook in many ways, because what's different about online products versus things made out of atoms as opposed to things made out of bits is that if you think about it, everything in the physical world depreciates. It loses value with wear and tear. Your clothing, your chair, your furniture, everything in the physical world, the more you use it, the less valuable it becomes as it depreciates. But these amazing companies, most of them online, that build these habit-forming products are able to create products that appreciate in use. The more you use, the more valuable they become because of data, content, reputation. All of these things make the product better and better the more you use it. And they also load the next trigger to bring you back in the future. So for example, when you send someone a message on Slack or any number of other messaging services, when you send someone that message, there's no immediate reward to sending that message. What you're doing is you're loading the next trigger because you're likely to get a reply. And that reply comes in the form of an external trigger that prompts you through the hook once again.
It's really interesting. And I've been reading Yuval Harari's new book, the author of Sapiens, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. And the first 2 chapters, he talks a lot about how, to your point about Freud and everything changing over time, how we're just biochemical systems, right? Mm-hmm. And the ability to reinforce those pathways, your dopamine hits and all that. It's really interesting how the culture of acceptance and how we think about these things is changing over the last few years.
Yeah, I really liked Sapiens. I'm not the biggest fan of some of his newest stuff. I think it's a little bit Chicken Little, scares everyone's pants off because his assumption. I think he's a really great author, a really great storyteller. I think he conflates the idea of free will with free choice. That the fact is, we are way more powerful at changing our behavior than we think. And I think by perpetuating this idea that technology is hijacking your brain, as Tristan Harris says, or Yuval says. Yeah,
the book is definitely written from like a macro perspective, and you're right. It doesn't give a ton of credit to the individual.
It doesn't, and Harari is convinced that that algorithms will be able to basically make your decisions for you, and he draws conclusions around, well, there's no free will, therefore the algorithms can tell you what to do. But free will is not the same as free choice.
Right.
And the fact is there is so much that we can do to put technology in its place. And in fact, there's this psychological phenomenon called reactance, that when people feel like they are being controlled, they rebel by design. And so I would argue the more you feel like your decisions are being made for you, I mean, think about it, right? Like you got a little smirk on your face now because you know it's true.
Yeah, because I have a problem with authority, and when someone tries to thumb me down,
exactly. And this is where we have to be very careful as product designers. I see this all the time, right? Like, oh man, there's so much to say about this topic. So Harari says, someday your technology will know you better than your mom knows you. Well, I hate doing what my mom used to tell me to do, right? Put on a coat. No, I'm not going to put on a coat just because you told me. I'll freeze because I don't want to do what you said.
Right.
And that's where we have to be very careful as product makers. I see so many companies that come to me and hire me as a consultant. and do great stuff. They're so altruistic. Companies that help you save money or exercise more, or do great stuff. And I want to help them, right? Because they're doing really great things for people. And many times these companies become very successful. Many times, though, they don't become successful because they don't realize that by telling people what to do, they elicit reactance and they get people to rebel. If an app tells you that you're still broke and you're still fat, you're not going to use it anymore, right? Because that's not a variable reward, that's a variable punishment.
Right.
So we have to be very careful to always maintain user autonomy.
Very interesting. So you have a new book that you're working on coming out later this year, Indestructibles. Tell us a little bit about that and what we can maybe expect from it. I know you're probably still writing it, or it's
No, it's done. It's going to be out in September 2019. I'm super excited for it to hit shelves. And the reason I'm so excited about it is because, for the same reason I wrote Hooked, I wrote it because I was trying to answer a question that I had around how do you build habit-forming products. This book, Indestructible, also has a very simple question that turns out to have a not-so-simple answer, which is, why don't we do what we say we're going to do, right? Imagine what would happen if we stopped lying to ourselves. I think most people think of themselves as honest. I certainly think of myself as honest. And yet, I noticed that I would tell myself I'll do something. Go to the gym, wake up early, eat right, save more money, be with my kids more. And yet, I didn't do it, right? Why? Why is that? Why do we lie to ourselves? And what I realize is that most people know what they want to do, and they even know how to do it. Right? So much money is made, billions of dollars is made in self-help around eating better and exercising more. And at the end of the day, we know, who doesn't know that chocolate cake is worse for you than a salad? We know how to lose weight. We know how to do this stuff. Why don't we do it? And it turns out that the culprit is not a knowledge gap. The culprit is distraction. Is that we get sidetracked and we don't know why and we don't know how to stop it. And originally, this whole exploration started because I was convinced, I read so many books about digital distraction and they all came to the same conclusion. The problem is the tech. Yeah. Right? And so I tried it. I tried digital detox. I tried digital minimalism. And none of it worked. I didn't want digital minimalism. I wanted life maximization. And even when I got rid of all that stuff, I did this experiment. I got rid of my cell phone. I got a feature phone so that I didn't have any apps. I got off social media. I purged myself of all this stuff. And it didn't freaking work. Because I'd sit down to write, which requires a lot of focus, requires you to not be distracted. And then I'd look behind me on my bookshelf. I said, I've been meaning to read that book. And, you know what? The laundry needs to be folded. And maybe I'll just go wash those dishes. Or I haven't called my parents in a long time. I should probably do that. And what I realized was that if you don't figure out the nature of distraction, if you don't understand what's going on within you, you will always be distracted by something. And in fact, humans have been struggling with distraction forever. Socrates and Aristotle talked about the nature of akrasia, this tendency that we have to do things against our interest. 2,500 years ago, they were talking about what a distracting, horrible place the world was.
It's fascinating. I don't know this, but I actually taught a productivity and focus, manage your attention in the digital age course last year on Skillshare, and that's actually how I got connected with Taylor at FocusMate. Yeah. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and you're right. It's really interesting, and what I have found is that at least for me, and I like to think of it as like I'm. How would I say this? The body is sort of needs to be put on autopilot, right? Mm-hmm. And you need to create an environment and systems in your life that can keep you on the rails, essentially. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Whether that's through weekly recurring events or certain tools you need or something. But that's sort of the best way that I found that. And the course goes through, it's only 25 minutes, but it goes over everything and tools and tricks and tips to do all that and reduce distraction. Yeah. It's really interesting. And I've seen great effects in my own life by implementing these things. And so I can't wait to read the book, and hopefully that'll be useful.
I think it's I like to call it the skill of the century. That I really think there's going to be a bifurcation between people who understand how to manage their attention and manage distraction, and those who don't. And those who don't are really going to suffer from it because the world is becoming potentially more distracting, not because of any nefarious corporations trying to hijack your brain, but just because people want to make better products, right? Netflix wants to make better shows. Facebook wants to make a more engaging user experience. Products are going to continue to be better. And that's not a problem. That's progress. But the the byproduct of this is that if you have a susceptibility towards distraction, or if you don't have the skills to manage distraction, oh boy, look out, because it's going to be very difficult to get your work done. It's going to be very difficult to maintain relationships. It's going to be very hard to make a good example for your children if you don't understand these skills that you need to manage distraction.
Yeah, I've seen it as it's a major asset. And what I've seen is, sort of the tortoise and the hare, right? Like we could be the hare and we can run around and, distracted and just you're never going to finish the race. And so I have found that just even slowing down just a little bit, which is really hard, right? Because slowing down requires you, if you're a busy person, to bottleneck in some way while you take a step back to figure these processes out for yourself. But in the long term, it's just so much more freeing because things can run on repeat, and it's really powerful. And I think I agree with you that there will be people that figure this out and there will be people that don't, and the people that do will have a significant advantage in their life, their career, pretty much everything.
Yeah. So I tried to give in Indestructible not only the strategy not only the tactics. I think a lot of books out there just give you the straight up tactics. Turn off this notification or do this or do that. And there's a lot of that in there to make it very practical, but I also wanted to give the strategy, a high level overview, a picture that you can have in your mind with these 4 basic steps so that no matter what new distraction comes along, you'll know how to put it in its place.
Love it. Can't wait to read it. Where can people check that out once it's live? Everywhere?
Yes. So that'll be pretty much everywhere. It'll be on Audible in August 2019, and then it goes for sale in print in September, very shortly after there, and also 2019, September 2019. And it's called Indestructible.
Awesome. Can't wait to check it out. The last question we have for you here today comes from one of the Founder Institute New York graduates, Ryan Salerno. Shout out to Ryan. We question about the future, right? So where do you think, we've talked a lot, and I love how philosophical this conversation has been. That was my minor in college. What are your thoughts on the future here of, there's the tech clash, people are talking about iPhone addiction. Obviously your book gives an armor of defense to protect against this, right? But, 10 years from now, where do you think the world is? Where do you think we're going?
Hard to answer. Which aspect? Like what will be, there's so many potential, how will the world change in what field?
Let's keep it psychological. Let's say from a psychological perspective, how we interact with software and machines. And let's not go 10 years because that's kind of daunting. Let's do the next 2 to 3 years. What are some trends you're seeing in the industry? Some new things, new tricks people are doing?
I think, so I've been bullish on auditory devices for a very long time now, for the past 5 years, and I've been predicting that the conversational interface, both in text format as well as in audible format, will continue to become increasingly important. I think we've seen that. I just saw that Amazon has 10,000 people working on the Echo device, so I think we're going to continue to see the importance of ubiquitous computers in a format that it doesn't look like our laptops or even our phones. It looks like something that we just talk to throughout the day. I think
maybe like the movie Her.
Yeah, I think that's inevitable. I'm very confident. I don't know about this kind of generalized intelligence. I think that's farther away than people think. But that form factor is coming for sure in our ear. The Apple AirBuds have certainly changed my life. I'm with those all the time. I love them. Yeah, they're fantastic. So I think the audio interface will continue to become increasingly important. I think that this idea of contingency that I haven't really talked about or published much about, but I think it's an important one to understand. This idea of contingency says that products change users and users change products. And it used to be that this happened very slowly. And this is kind of the macro arch to my work, is that, if you think about when Henry Ford had the Model T, he famously is attributed to saying if you wanted a Model T, you could have it in any color as long as it was black. And the reason he said that was because it was really hard to retool his production line to make it different colors. Well, then, of course, time passes and, now you can get cars in any color you want, but it still takes time for physical goods to change. What's amazing, and I think we don't appreciate enough, is that, many of the products that we spend most of our time with these days are adapting in real time to us based on our data, right? So that's the process of contingency. We're building habits with these products, but then we're also giving them data to update and change in real time. So if you logged into my Pinterest account, it wouldn't be interesting to you because it's been tailored to me based on my data. I am co-creating my experience with the company.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to see this idea of contingency in all sorts of products, especially with the greater proliferation of machine learning and artificial intelligence. That process will continue to, I think in general, make things great. I mean, you don't hear it much these days, but I'm very much a techno-optimist. I think, what makes humans so special and so different from every other species on the face of the earth is that we are eminently adaptable. We adapt ourselves to everything.
So that raises a question in my head, a follow-up question here. So have you read Paul Graham's essay called The Defragmentation? Mm-hmm. Basically speaking about how, in his opinion, for the last 50 years, everyone had, two choices of bread, three TV stations, right? Mm-hmm. That the last 100 years was an anomaly where everyone knew the same things, right? Mm-hmm. And then the future I think you're describing where everything is catered to everyone's individual interests, right? And so I'm actually working on a blog post this month called "The Death of the Monoculture," right? Where we're starting to see everyone get siloed and these have their own things, and it's great because if you're a Twitch gamer for speedrunning Barbie games. Shout out to my friend Amanda. You have a community and people that do that, right? And so, how do you envision how do you envision community in this world that you're describing, right? What drives a sense of community if everyone is just super niched into each and every little thing?
Yeah, I think it enables more online community and probably less real world community, which is a problem. Okay. I think, if we look at the decrease in religious institutional attendance, Robert Putnam's theory of bowling alone, how more of us are spending less time with civic organizations, I think is part of why people are more lonely today than they were in the past. Because to connect with anybody, you had to get out of your house and go bowling, participate in Kiwanis, like do something with others in physical space. Well, today you can do that in virtual space. So in a way, it's fantastic because people in niche communities, I think, LGBT is a great example of that. When I was growing up, there was no place to go. Right? Like you couldn't find people of your tribe. And back then, the suicide rate for LGBT youth was way, way higher. And that's consistently gone down over time because they can find an outlet. They can find someone who understands them online. I think that's fantastic. On the other hand, that means that it's easier to find a niche community without necessarily interacting with anybody in physical space. Now, again, I'm very long on human ingenuity and adaptability, and I think the more we see that this is a problem, that we lack some of that physical interaction, I think we're going to see a resurgence in the next few years of using technology to help us reconnect in the physical world, whether that's meetups, whether that's other organizations like Everyman that help people meet together and take care of each other in the physical world as well.
Yeah, I love that. And it'll be really interesting to see how you're right, the intersection of real estate and software actually comes together in the next few years. Hopefully that does get solved.
Yeah, I think that we're, again, adaptability is the greatest human trait. And there's no reason to think we can't continue to adapt.
Awesome. Well, Nir, thank you for coming on the pod today. For those listening, the show notes, which includes everything we discussed, links to books, everything will be up on our website, siscar.co. Don't forget to leave us a review, share this episode with a friend, someone that you think would appreciate this episode. We appreciate you doing that. Nir, we're going to go over to the back channel here, best advice you ever received. But before that, blog, Twitter, website, anything else you want to plug?
Yeah, so my website is nirandfar.com. Nir spelled like my first name, N-I-R, so nirandfar.com. And my first book is Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products. And my next book, which will be available in fall 2019, is Indestructible. Awesome. Well, thank you again for coming on the pod. Stay curious, everyone, and we will see you all on the next episode of Ambition Today.
Thanks for listening to Ambition Today. Be sure to visit siscar.co to get all the information from this episode and more great content. Until next time, stay curious, everyone.